On June 15th, 1985, the town of Cedar Hollow seemed to hum with excitement. The streets were adorned with white ribbons. Clusters of pastel balloons floated near the town square, and the faint scent of roses lingered in the warm summer air. Everyone knew the wedding would be memorable, not because Cedar Hollow had hosted so many extravagant events, but because of the couple at its center, Michael Trent and Lila Morgan. Michael was the kind of man who carried an air of quiet confidence. Broad-shouldered, with dark hair combed meticulously to the side, he had been a mechanic for the local garage since he graduated from high school. Lila, in contrast, was luminous, with a laugh that could draw attention even in the most crowded rooms. She had grown up in Cedar Hollow, but had spent her college years studying literature in Boston. People whispered that she was almost too perfect for a small town. Yet somehow, Michael had become the only one who could match her energy and wit. The ceremony took place in St. Mark's Church, a modest building whose stained glass windows depicted the stories of saints long forgotten by most of the congregation. Sunlight filtered through the glass, painting multicolored patterns on the polished wooden pews. Lila walked down the aisle with her father, arms linked, her white satin gown flowing behind her like a cloud of light. Michael waited at the altar, his eyes reflecting a mix of joy, nervousness, and something unspoken, an intensity that would later haunt those who tried to piece together what happened next. After the vows and the exchange of rings, the couple stepped outside to a chorus of cheers. Friends and family tossed petals in the air, and a photographer captured the moment that everyone assumed would be immortalized in smiles and laughter. But as Michael and Lila waved to the crowd, a sudden shadow flickered across their faces. Some of the guests thought it was a cloud passing over the sun. Others swore it felt like the air had momentarily chilled. The reception was held at the Cedar Hollow Community Hall. It was a modest affair by most standards, but the townspeople had gone all out. The hall smelled of freshly baked bread, roasted chicken, and the faint hint of vanilla from the wedding cake. Musicians played soft jazz in the corner, and couples danced cautiously on the worn wooden floor. Yet, even amidst the celebration, there was a subtle tension. A few guests would later recall noticing that Michael kept glancing toward the hall's back exit, almost as if expecting someone or something. By the end of the night, Michael and Lila had driven off in a borrowed vintage sedan, their hands entwined, headlights disappearing into the winding roads that led out of Cedar Hollow. Friends and family assumed the couple had simply driven to a nearby hotel for their honeymoon, though, oddly, the Trent and Morgan families had received no calls confirming their arrival. The next morning, the car was gone, parked neatly in the driveway, keys untouched. Michael and Lila had vanished. Local authorities were baffled. The police questioned neighbors, co-workers, and even local travelers passing through the area, but no one had seen the couple leave town. No signs of a struggle appeared in the garage, the church, or the reception hall. It was as though Michael and Lila had been erased from existence. Flyers went up, radio announcements were made, and the story even reached regional newspapers. Yet, after weeks turned into months, the trail went cold. Life in Cedar Hollow tried to move on. The reception hall continued to host community events. The church still held Sunday services, and families carried on with birthdays and holidays. But those who had known Michael and Lila never truly forgot them. A sense of unease lingered, subtle but persistent, like the aftertaste of something bitter that had gone unsaid. People claimed to hear the faint strains of music from the night of the wedding, or to catch glimpses of a car parked by the woods at twilight. Each account was dismissed as imagination or grief, yet the memories refused to fade. Years passed. The town aged. Streets cracked. Trees grew heavier with moss, and new families moved into old homes, unaware of the events that had once rocked Cedar Hollow to its core. Meanwhile, the disappearance of Michael and Lila became one of those local legends people spoke of quietly, almost reluctantly, as though uttering their names aloud might summon them back, or worse, attract the attention of whatever had taken them. It wasn't until 12 years later that the first concrete clue emerged, not from a witness, a note, or a confession, but from a satellite image. In 1997, the National Geographic Survey had commissioned aerial photography for mapping purposes. An analyst, reviewing the images for a new Cedar Hollow topographic study, noticed a peculiar anomaly in the forested area just beyond the town's northern ridge. The coordinates corresponded to a patch of land that had been assumed unremarkable, a stretch of pine and oak trees frequented only by deer and the occasional hiker. At first glance, it seemed innocuous, but closer inspection revealed subtle geometric patterns in the clearing, patterns too deliberate to be natural. Lines and shapes suggested foundations, walls, or even enclosures, almost invisible beneath the canopy. What startled the analyst the most was a faint outline resembling a road or path leading to the clearing, one that did not appear on any maps and had not been traveled in living memory. Word of the discovery spread slowly, cautiously. Local law enforcement, now dealing with modern technology for the first time, hesitated to act without verification. Still, a sense of urgency gripped those familiar with the old case files. Could it be possible that Michael and Lila had been hidden there all along, lost to the forest, their fates intertwined with secrets nobody in Cedar Hollow had suspected existed? The image sparked more questions than answers. Who would have orchestrated such a disappearance? Why would a couple vanish on the happiest day of their lives? And most importantly, what, if anything, survived in that hidden clearing to tell the story of what had truly happened that night in 1985? The next step required more than speculation. An investigation, modern, methodical, and unflinching, had to reach into the past, retracing the paths Michael and Lila might have taken, probing the land that had concealed them for over a decade, and confronting the shadows that had long haunted Cedar Hollow. By the time the satellite image made its way into official channels, Cedar Hollow had changed in subtle ways. The northern ridge, where the anomaly had appeared, was still dense with pine and oak, but logging roads carved through the forest had created pockets of open space that hadn't existed in 1985. Local authorities, now equipped with computers and GPS devices, decided to approach the clearing cautiously. They assembled a small team, a forest ranger, a detective with experience in cold cases, and a geospatial analyst who had first identified the patterns in the images. Detective Harper Lane had grown up in Cedar Hollow and remembered the wedding like it was yesterday. The town's disappearance stories had always circulated quietly at school and in grocery store conversations, but Harper never imagined she would play a role in solving it. When she saw the satellite images, she felt the familiar tug of disbelief mixed with grim determination. The clearing was almost perfectly square, roughly 30 meters on each side, with shadows suggesting structures that had resisted decay for 12 years. The team arrived at the edge of the forest in early autumn. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine needles was strong. Sunlight filtered through the branches, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers across the forest floor. The ranger, Tom Keller, led the way, his boots crunching against leaves thick with the season's first frost. Harper followed, her hand hovering near her belt, where her notebook, flashlight, and standard-issue firearm rested. The analyst, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, trailed behind with a laptop and a handheld GPS scanner, tracking the coordinates they had pinpointed from the satellite image. As they approached the clearing, an unsettling silence settled over them. No birds sang, no small animals rustled in the underbrush. It was as though the forest itself had been holding its breath. When the clearing finally came into view, the team froze. The patterns in the satellite image were far more distinct in person. What looked like faint geometric outlines from above were revealed on the ground as depressions, the remains of structures built with precision. Wooden beams, now rotted and partially collapsed, formed what had once been walls. Concrete slabs, cracked and covered in moss, suggested foundations. There were signs of human activity, footprints long since overgrown, fragments of what could have been tools, and patches of disturbed earth that seemed deliberately arranged. Dr. Shaw knelt near one of the depressions, running her fingers over the soil. "This wasn't just a temporary campsite," she said quietly. "Someone built something here. And it wasn't random." Harper's eyes swept across the clearing. Her mind raced with the possibilities. Could Michael and Lila have been lured here willingly? Or had they been taken? And if someone had planned this, who, in a quiet town like Cedar Hollow, could have orchestrated such a disappearance without leaving a trace? The team began a methodical examination of the site. They discovered fragments of personal items, what looked like a tarnished cufflink, a piece of delicate fabric, a small button, scattered in a seemingly deliberate pattern. Harper's stomach tightened as she recognized the style of the cufflink. It matched the wedding invitation she had seen when she'd helped organize the ceremony 12 years earlier. The deeper they investigated, the more disturbing details emerged. Beneath a collapsed wooden frame, they found what appeared to be shallow trenches, lined with stones in a manner that suggested someone had gone to great lengths to fortify the area. There were signs of fire, carefully contained, and charred fragments of paper that bore strange symbols, faded beyond recognition. The air felt heavier here, almost charged, as if the forest itself remembered the events that had taken place. Despite the apparent age of the site, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. The shadows between the trees seemed too deliberate, the occasional crack of a branch too timed to be mere coincidence. She kept her gaze steady, reminding herself that fear could distort reality, but the sense of being observed refused to leave. Hours passed as the team mapped the site, cataloged evidence, and documented everything with photographs and sketches. Dr. Shaw overlaid their findings with the original satellite images, confirming that the structures aligned almost perfectly with the geometric patterns visible from above. The deliberate nature of the construction left no room for doubt. Michael and Lila had been held here, and whoever was responsible had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal their presence. As dusk fell, Harper noticed something unusual near the edge of the clearing, a faint trail leading deeper into the forest, almost invisible beneath the undergrowth. It wasn't on the satellite images, suggesting it had been deliberately hidden or had grown over in the intervening years. Harper felt a shiver crawl down her spine. "This could be a secondary site," she murmured to Tom. "Or a way out, if they ever escaped." Tom shook his head. "Or a trap. Either way, we need to follow it carefully." Nightfall comes fast in these woods. The forest seemed to grow darker, colder, as the team prepared to trace the trail. Every step felt like moving through a memory not entirely their own, the air thick with echoes of the past. Harper's thoughts returned to the wedding night. The excitement, the joy, the sudden chill as the couple disappeared. And now, more than a decade later, they were standing at the threshold of a secret that had eluded the town, the police, and every investigator who had tried to solve the mystery. What they would find at the end of that trail would shatter their understanding of Cedar Hollow forever. The truth was not a simple case of disappearance. It was something far more complex, far older, and far darker than anyone could have imagined. The trail Harper and her team had discovered was faint, barely distinguishable beneath the layers of fallen leaves and underbrush. It snaked through the forest with unnatural precision, curving in ways that seemed designed rather than random. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were pressing in, urging them to turn back. Dr. Shaw scanned the surroundings with her handheld GPS, comparing the coordinates to the satellite images. "The clearing we found isn't the only anomaly," she said, her voice low. "There are other depressions, smaller ones, aligned in a pattern that extends further north. This trail, it could connect them." Tom Keller grunted. "So we're basically walking into the middle of someone else's plan. 12 years later, and it's still active enough that it hasn't completely decayed." His tone carried unease, the kind that settles into the pit of the stomach, the way one feels standing on the edge of water, too deep to see the bottom. Harper stayed focused. The forest had a rhythm now, an unsettling cadence of creaking branches, snapping twigs, and distant rustling. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious. She remembered the reports from locals over the years, fleeting glimpses of figures in the trees, sounds in the night, strange lights in the woods. They had all been dismissed as imagination or superstition, but now Harper wondered if the stories had been warnings disguised as myth. After nearly an hour, the trail opened into a secondary clearing. Unlike the first, this space was smaller but structured with a precision that was almost architectural. Stones formed concentric circles, each one meticulously placed, and within the circles were remnants of what appeared to be wooden stakes, rotted and blackened. The ground was scorched in patches, evidence of repeated fires, but unlike natural burn patterns, these had been deliberately contained, forming symbols that even Harper couldn't immediately recognize. Dr. Shaw crouched, brushing leaves away from a series of indentations. These marks, they're deliberate, not just for fire. Someone constructed this with purpose, perhaps as part of a series. This looks ritualistic. Harper's stomach tightened. Ritualistic. The word carried implications she didn't want to consider. Who would go to such lengths to hide a couple? Why build these geometric formations and burn symbols into the earth? Questions swirled like smoke around the team, but answers remained elusive. As they explored further, Harper noticed something unusual. The forest here was eerily still. Not a single bird, not a squirrel. Nothing moved except for the occasional gust of wind that shook leaves from the branches. Even the sunlight seemed muted, filtered through an almost unnatural canopy of dense foliage. A sense of isolation, of being removed from the normal world, settled over the team. The trail continued beyond this second clearing, narrowing into what looked like an old logging path, long abandoned. The trees arched over the path, forming a tunnel that blocked much of the remaining daylight. Harper led the team cautiously, her flashlight cutting through the shadows, revealing remnants of old tools and discarded items that had been intentionally hidden beneath leaves. Small fragments of cloth, bits of jewelry, and other personal effects littered the ground. Harper recognized one item immediately, a delicate silver pendant, engraved with initials she had seen on the original wedding invitation. MT. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. 12 years. 12 long years. And here was a fragment of Michael Trent's life, preserved and placed deliberately for discovery, or perhaps as a warning. The deeper they went, the more intricate the setup became. It wasn't just a couple of isolated clearings. It was an entire network of concealed sites, each connected by trails almost invisible from the ground, but clear from above. The forest itself had been manipulated, molded into a labyrinth designed to hide, protect, or perhaps even trap. Harper couldn't determine yet which, but the sheer scale was staggering. Finally, as twilight approached, the trail ended at a structure partially concealed beneath a thick canopy. It was a cabin, but not ordinary. Its walls were constructed from heavy timbers, reinforced with stone in places, and the roof had been camouflaged with branches and moss. Windows were either covered or boarded up. It looked abandoned, yet the signs of human presence were unmistakable. Ash in a fire pit, footprints in the dirt, and the faint scent of something metallic lingering in the air. Harper signaled the team to stop. "This is it," she said quietly. "Whatever happened to Michael and Lila, it happened here." Tom nodded, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. "And it's waiting for us." Dr. Shaw moved closer to the structure, her scientific curiosity battling the primal sense of danger that hung in the air. She peered at the ground and noticed faint marks, small depressions, almost like handprints pressed into the earth, aligned with the doorway. Harper's eyes followed the marks, and a chill ran down her spine. They were not recent, but they were deliberate, ceremonial. Someone had used this site for something meaningful, something dark, and left evidence that could be interpreted by those who knew the symbols. Harper's voice was barely audible. If they were alive, or trapped, this is where we'll find answers. But if not, her sentence trailed off. The team understood without her finishing. Whatever had occurred here had the power to destroy lives, hide secrets, and warp time itself. They gathered at the edge of the structure, aware that stepping inside meant crossing a threshold from which the past and present would collide. The air was heavy, the forest silent, as if holding its breath. Harper reached for the door, the faint scent of old wood, smoke, and something indefinably human curling in the air. She paused. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the treetops, leaving the forest bathed in twilight. In that moment, Harper felt the weight of the 12 years, the missing couple, the unanswered questions. She lifted her hand and pushed the door open. Inside, shadows danced across the walls. Shapes formed in the corners, draped in cobwebs and decay. And in the center of the room, partially hidden beneath a tattered blanket of moss and dirt, was the first tangible clue that Michael and Lila had never truly left this place. The air inside the cabin was stale, heavy with the scent of decay, smoke, and something else Harper couldn't immediately identify. Metallic, almost coppery, like blood long dried. Dust motes swirled in the beams of their flashlights, giving the small space an ethereal, almost otherworldly glow. The walls, reinforced with timbers and stone, bore scratches and gouges, marks of labor, struggle, and perhaps desperation. Harper stepped carefully, scanning the floor. Every plank creaked underfoot, and every shadow seemed to twist unnaturally. Tom Keller followed closely, his hand resting on the flashlight's hilt as though it were a weapon. Dr. Shaw crouched near a corner, examining faded symbols etched into the floorboards and walls. These symbols, Doctor, Shaw said softly, tracing the markings with a gloved finger. They're not just decorative. They're intentional. They could be protective, ritualistic, or even meant to communicate something. Someone who did this knew what they were doing. Harper's eyes scanned the room. In the center, partially covered in layers of moss and dust, lay a small chest. It was old, its wood darkened and warped with age, bound with iron clasps that were rusted but still intact. Something about it drew Harper in, the sense of inevitability settling in her chest like a stone. She knelt and carefully pried the lid open. Inside were remnants of a life interrupted. A folded wedding invitation yellowed with age, a photograph of Michael and Lila smiling, and, most unsettling of all, a series of letters bound with a leather cord. Harper gingerly lifted the bundle, careful not to disturb the fragile contents. The handwriting was unmistakable. It matched Michael's, at least from the samples she had seen years ago. The first letter was addressed to anyone who finds this. Harper read aloud, "If you are reading this, then the truth has been discovered. Lila and I were never meant to leave Cedar Hollow. They have been watching, waiting, and preparing. The clearing, the cabin, the symbols, none of it is random. I do not know who will come after us, but we have left traces. Follow the signs, and perhaps you will understand what happened to us. If you do not, then beware." A chill ran down Harper's spine. The tone was frantic but deliberate, as if Michael had been forced to write under pressure, yet still had the presence of mind to leave instructions. She continued through the letters. They chronicled weeks leading up to the wedding, strange occurrences in the town, and subtle hints that someone or something was observing the couple. Lila had mentioned shadows that moved in her peripheral vision, objects displaced in their home, and the occasional stranger who seemed to know details about their lives without explanation. Michael's entries became increasingly desperate. He described being followed, noticing patterns in the forest, and discovering symbols carved into trees near their home, symbols that now echoed those in the cabin. The last letter was the most disturbing. It detailed the night of the wedding. Michael wrote that shortly after the ceremony, a group of people, or something resembling people, had appeared, orchestrating the disappearance. He described being forced into the forest, Lila following reluctantly, and being guided into the cabin and surrounding clearings. His words were fragmented, filled with fear, but they painted a chilling picture. The couple had been taken not by chance, but by design. Harper felt a tight knot in her stomach. The disappearance wasn't random, a fleeting abduction, or even the result of a crime of passion. It was planned, methodical, and ritualistic. The letters hinted at a larger pattern, a web that extended beyond the town, perhaps even beyond the forest. Dr. Shaw examined the floor markings closer, her voice tense. These symbols match some ancient diagrams I've studied. They're protective seals, meant to contain something. And the fact that they're here, around this cabin, around the clearings, it suggests they were trying to keep it in, or keep something out. I'm not entirely sure which. Harper looked around the room again. Faint scratches along the walls formed a sequence, almost like a map. It occurred to her that Michael and Lila had left more than just letters. They had left clues embedded in the very structure of the cabin. Each symbol, each indentation, might hold the key to understanding not only where they had been, but what had taken them. As they investigated further, Harper noticed a faint draft coming from a hidden corner of the room. Behind a stack of rotting timber, a narrow crawl space led downward into darkness. The smell was stronger there, more pungent, metallic, and unmistakably human. Harper hesitated, then pulled out her flashlight and shone it into the crawl space. The beam revealed the tip of a ladder, leading further down into the earth, into a subterranean network that neither the satellite images nor the forest trail had revealed. Tom Keller shook his head. This just keeps getting worse. What the hell is down there? Harper swallowed hard. Whatever it is, it's part of why they disappeared. Michael and Lila. They were never meant to leave. And I think the answers we need are down there. As night fell outside the cabin, the forest seemed to grow even quieter. Every rustle, every distant howl, every snap of a branch sounded amplified. Harper and the team exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that the next step would take them into a darkness that hadn't been disturbed for 12 years. A darkness where time, memory, and life itself might have been warped beyond recognition. And deep in the shadows of the crawlspace, the faintest echoes of footsteps, soft, deliberate, seemed to respond. The crawlspace was narrow, forcing Harper and the team to crouch low as they descended. The ladder groaned under their weight, each step sending echoes bouncing off the stone walls. The air grew colder, damp and heavy with the unmistakable scent of earth, decay, and metal. Harper's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only the rough stone walls and the ladder stretching downward into shadow. Tom Keller went first, followed by Harper and then Dr. Shaw, who clutched her notebook and GPS like a lifeline. Each of them felt the oppressive weight of the unknown pressing down. The faint rustle of leaves and branches outside was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by their own measured breathing. At the base of the ladder, the crawl space widened into a tunnel, carved roughly into the rock. Footprints were visible in the dust, some fresh, some older, but all carefully oriented as if guiding someone along a path. Harper's pulse quickened. The tunnel was not natural. It had been constructed, deliberately, to conceal what lay beyond. They proceeded cautiously, flashlights sweeping over the walls. Carved into the stone were more symbols, similar to those above ground. But here, they were accompanied by faint stains that spoke of human contact. Harper tried to focus on the practical, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every corner suggested movement. After several hundred feet, the tunnel opened into a subterranean chamber, its size far exceeding what the cabin above might have suggested. The space was lined with wooden supports, stone walls, and remnants of what appeared to have once been furniture, crates, tables, and shelving, now rotted and broken. In the center lay a large depression, partially filled with earth, almost like a grave, but oddly structured. Harper approached carefully, her flashlight illuminating the remains of personal items scattered around, fragments of clothing, jewelry, and a small locket engraved with the initials LM. She knelt, her stomach tightening. This was unmistakably Lila's. Dr. Shaw examined the surrounding markings. The arrangement, it's deliberate. The positioning of the objects, the depressions, even the symbols. It's as if they were meant to tell a story, or perhaps to channel something. Whoever did this, it wasn't random. Harper noticed faint scratches on the walls near the depression. They weren't deep, but they formed letters, or something resembling writing. She leaned in closer. It's hard to read, but it could be a name, or a warning. Tom ran his flashlight along the edges of the chamber. "There's more," he muttered. "Look at the walls. These aren't just marks. There are niches, hidden recesses. Some of them contain fragments of bones, and some, small tools. Surgical, almost." Harper's stomach turned. "Bones?" Tom nodded grimly. "Not recent, but definitely human. Someone was here, using this space. Possibly for years." Dr. Shaw shone her light across the floor. "It's consistent with the letters Michael left. They weren't just hiding. They were trapped, held in a space designed to contain them, or perhaps to transform something." Harper's mind raced. If Michael and Lila had survived for any time here, they would have left more than letters. They would have left traces of life, attempts to escape. Yet the chamber was meticulously organized, suggesting that whoever controlled it had complete dominion. The team proceeded deeper into the chamber, discovering more niches and small tunnels branching off from the main space. Each contained remnants of the couple's belongings. A scarf here, a ring there, some writing scratched into the stone. The cumulative effect was chilling. A 12-year diary etched in fragments of objects, in signs, and in silence. At the far end of the chamber, they discovered a stone alcove, partially covered by rotted timber. Inside were two skeletal figures, curled as if in sleep, their clothing worn and partially decayed. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Even in death, the arrangement seemed deliberate. The skeletons were positioned carefully, with their hands almost touching, echoing the wedding photograph she had seen months ago. Dr. Shaw approached cautiously, examining the bones. These are Michael and Lila. It's them. And the positioning. It's symbolic. Whoever did this wanted them to remain together, or wanted the world to see them like this. Harper's mind whirled with questions. Who had orchestrated this? Why keep the couple alive for so long, only to leave them here? And what was the purpose of the symbols, the carvings, the ritualistic arrangement of objects? Then, a sudden sound made them freeze. A faint whisper, or perhaps the rustle of something moving in the tunnel behind them. Harper's flashlight swept across the chamber, but the shadows revealed nothing. Still, the sensation persisted, a pressure at the edge of perception, as if the forest, the cabin, and the chamber were alive, aware of their intrusion. Harper swallowed hard. "We're not alone," she said quietly. "Whatever was controlling this, it might still be here." Dr. Shaw shivered. Or it left something behind. Something conscious. The precision, the patterns. It's almost like it's watching, waiting. Harper felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The discovery of Michael and Lila was only the beginning. Whatever force, human or otherwise, had orchestrated their disappearance 12 years ago was part of a larger, ongoing design. And now, by stepping into the chamber, they had become part of it. As they documented the scene, taking photographs and notes, the faintest draft stirred the edges of the chamber, carrying with it a whisper. inaudible, yet distinctly there. Harper's heart raced. The forest, the cabin, and the tunnels were more than just hiding places. They were a labyrinth designed to ensnare, conceal, and perhaps even preserve something older than Cedar Hollow itself. And Harper knew, with an unsettling clarity, that discovering Michael and Lila was not the end. It was the moment when the true horror began to reveal itself. The chamber felt alive, the air thick with a presence that Harper couldn't define. Even with Michael and Lila identified among the skeletal remains, there was more here. Something unaccounted for, something deliberate and watchful. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift just beyond the reach of their flashlights, and the faint draft whispered through the tunnel as if carrying a message from the past. Dr. Shaw crouched near one of the stone niches, examining markings that had gone unnoticed until now. "These symbols," she said, her voice low. "They repeat. Not just here, but across all the clearings above. Whoever did this, they're marking something, creating a network. It's almost like a map. But it's not a map of land. It's a map of control." Harper's heart raced. Control of what? Shaw traced her gloved finger across a series of angular symbols carved into the stone. Time, space, life. "I can't be sure yet, but everything here is arranged to manipulate perception, to channel something. These patterns aren't just protective, they're directive. Whoever built this wasn't hiding. They were orchestrating. And Michael and Lila were part of it." Tom Keller shifted uncomfortably. "You're saying they weren't just victims?" Harper shook her head. "They were victims. But someone, or something, was using them as pieces in a larger design. And judging by the construction above and below ground, this isn't the first time. Cedar Hollow has been hosting these events for decades." The team continued exploring the subterranean network, uncovering more niches, each containing faint remnants of human habitation, scraps of clothing, burned fragments of paper, broken tools. It became clear that the site had been in use for a long time, systematically maintained, almost ritualistically. Then, Harper noticed something odd. One of the tunnels had a series of narrow passageways leading deeper into the earth. Unlike the larger chambers, these paths were too small for full-grown adults to navigate comfortably. The walls bore markings that seemed deliberately oriented toward the floor, almost as if designed for someone or something smaller. Dr. Shaw examined the markings with her flashlight. "These aren't human scale," she murmured. "They may indicate activity from someone, or something else entirely. Maybe the architects of this network had helpers, or captives who were kept elsewhere." Harper felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Or they were experimenting. The thought hung over them, heavy and unspoken. Experiments, manipulation, preservation. All 12 years of Michael and Lila's absence suddenly seemed to align with an intricate, unseen logic. As they pressed further, Harper noticed faint echoes, subtle but deliberate. Footsteps, voices. She paused, listening, but the team insisted there was nothing. Only the sound of shifting air and the occasional drip of water. Yet the sensation of being watched intensified, as though the walls themselves were alive. At the end of the narrow passageway, they found a chamber smaller than the previous ones, its floor covered in dust and debris. In the center lay a stone pedestal, carved with symbols nearly identical to those above ground and in the main chamber. On the pedestal rested a small metal box, locked and corroded with age. Harper's hand trembled as she reached for it. Dr. Shaw's voice was tense. "Whatever's in that box, it's part of the system, the network. It may hold the key to understanding why Michael and Lila were taken, and perhaps who, or what, controls all of this." Harper pried the box open. Inside was a collection of items that defied simple explanation. Small bones arranged in deliberate patterns, faded photographs of unknown individuals, and a set of manuscripts written in a ciphered language that seemed to shift under the light. Harper flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. The text detailed events spanning decades, accounts of disappearances, rituals, and references to a network of people and forces operating in Cedar Hollow long before Michael and Lila. Tom leaned in, his voice low. This goes beyond the two of them. Someone's been running this operation for generations. Harper's mind reeled. The disappearance of Michael and Lila was not an isolated incident. It was part of a continuum, a sequence of events meticulously orchestrated by someone or something, with knowledge, patience, and an agenda that spanned decades. The manuscripts hinted at others who had vanished in similar circumstances, each connected to the network through symbols, clearings, and hidden spaces. Dr. Shaw examined a set of diagrams drawn in the margins. See this? Each clearing, each subterranean chamber, they align in a pattern visible from above. That satellite image, it's just one node in a network. Michael and Lila were one node, but there are others. Harper swallowed hard, meaning there could still be captives. Or worse, something else entirely. The forest above remained silent, almost oppressive, as if aware of the revelations below. Harper knew that what they had uncovered would shake Cedar Hollow to its core. The network wasn't just a series of hidden spaces. It was a system, a living web of secrecy and manipulation. And somewhere, out there, the orchestrator of it all was still at work. Harper closed the metal box carefully. The darkness of the chamber seemed thicker now, as though the air itself was aware of their intrusion. Every shadow felt alive. Every whisper of wind carried intent. The discovery of Michael and Lila had only scratched the surface. The deeper truth of Cedar Hollow, of the forces that had claimed them, was still waiting, patient, deliberate, and far from finished. By the time Harper and her team returned to the surface, night had already descended over Cedar Hollow. The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the eardrums and made every rustle of leaves feel like a warning. The weight of what they'd found underground lingered heavily, as though the chambers beneath the soil were still watching them, still whispering their secrets. Back at the sheriff's office, Harper spread the manuscripts across the evidence table. Dr. Shaw leaned over them, scribbling translations as she went. Tom hovered nearby, pacing restlessly, while Deputy Harlan sat stiffly in the corner, his jaw tight. "These aren't just records," Shaw said finally, tapping her pen against a page filled with angular symbols and looping script. "They're instructions. Whoever kept these wasn't just documenting the disappearances. They were planning them, coordinating them." Harper scanned the lines, her eyes catching on repeated phrases. The hollow must be fed. The circle must remain unbroken. Witnesses will be marked. Her stomach tightened. It's not just about abductions. It's about ritual, continuity. They believed they were maintaining something that required sacrifice. Tom stopped pacing. "So, you're telling me the town's been sitting on some cult this whole time?" Shaw shook her head. "Not a cult. A system. See these diagrams?" She spread out another manuscript page, revealing a circular pattern with nodes radiating outward. Each node corresponds to one of the forest clearings, and each clearing matches a disappearance. This isn't random. Someone, or some group, designed Cedar Hollow itself to be part of the structure. Deputy Harlan finally spoke, his voice low. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about the circle in the woods. He said it wasn't safe to go past certain markers after sundown. I thought it was just folklore. Now I'm not so sure." Harper's hands tightened into fists. "Folklore built on fact. Michael and Lila weren't just unlucky. They were chosen, placed at one of the nodes in this system." The realization cut deeper than any of them had expected. This wasn't about solving a single case anymore. It was about unraveling a web of secrets woven into the very history of Cedar Hollow. The next day, Harper and Shaw began cross-referencing the manuscripts with public records. One by one, they uncovered a pattern that made their blood run cold. Disappearances going back as far as the 1920s, each one occurring near one of the marked clearings, each person vanishing under circumstances that were either unexplained or dismissed as accident. There was the teenage girl in 1933, last seen walking home from church. The logger in 1949, who disappeared after his shift and was never found. The young mother in 1962, who vanished from her farmhouse with the doors locked from the inside. All threads in the same pattern. Shaw pointed at the chart they'd created on the wall. Look, every 12 years, the pattern repeats. Always in Cedar Hollow, always at a different node. Michael and Lila were taken in 1985. That puts the next event in 1997, Harper finished, her throat dry. This year. The room fell silent. Tom rubbed his face, muttering, "So what? We're just waiting for someone else to vanish? Or do we stop it?" Harper stared at the chart, her pulse hammering in her ears. "We don't wait. We find out who's behind this and end it. If the manuscripts are right, the next victim hasn't been taken yet, which means we have a chance." But the question remained, who had orchestrated this for so long? Who maintained the network, kept the clearings hidden, and recorded everything in manuscripts? The town itself seemed complicit. Its silence, its missing records, the way stories had been reduced to folklore. Late that night, Harper sat alone in her office, staring at the evidence board. The photographs of Michael and Lila, smiling on their wedding day, looked back at her with a kind of quiet sorrow. They hadn't just vanished. They'd been consumed by something far larger, something insidious and patient. And now, 12 years later, the system was ready to claim another victim. When her desk phone rang, the sound made her jump. She picked it up quickly, her voice steady despite the dread clawing at her stomach. "Sheriff Harper." On the other end, a distorted voice whispered just 3 words before the line went dead. "The circle waits." Harper sat frozen, the silence in the room heavier than stone. Whoever was behind this wasn't just a shadow in the past. They were here, alive and watching. The voice on the phone lingered in Harper's ears long after the line had gone dead. "The circle waits." She replayed it over and over, the distortion sinking into her bones. Whoever had called knew. They weren't just some prankster parroting back words from the manuscripts. They were inside the system. By morning, Harper had doubled the patrols around Cedar Hollow, though she knew it was like trying to guard shadows. The forest was too vast, the clearings too many, the system too old. Still, she couldn't just sit back and wait for the next disappearance. Dr. Shaw had spent the night dissecting the manuscripts. When Harper entered the office, Shaw was hunched over the desk, surrounded by translation notes and old maps. Her eyes were bloodshot, but alive with grim clarity. "I found something," Shaw said, tapping the edge of a page. "Each cycle isn't random. The manuscripts say the victim must be of bond, of blood, or of vow. In plain terms, family ties, kinship, or marriage. Michael and Lila were chosen because of their vow, newlyweds. This time, the victim will be someone bound by one of those categories." Harper felt her stomach drop. "So, it's not just anyone. They'll target a family, or a wedding, or—" Shaw nodded. "Or someone marked in the town's lineage. I cross-referenced the manuscripts with local genealogies. It's horrifying, but the disappearances line up with old family names, the ones that have lived here the longest." Deputy Harlan entered, his expression grim. "Then, we may have a problem. The Whitaker family is holding a wedding out at the old mill this weekend. Whole town's invited." The air went cold. Harper stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That can't be a coincidence. If the cycle is due this year, That wedding is the target. The team mobilized quickly, but unease gnawed at Harper. This wasn't just about guarding a wedding. The manuscripts made it clear. Those orchestrating the cycle weren't simply abducting people. They were conducting a ritual. And if they had survived this long, it was because they had protection, secrecy, and power woven into the town itself. The night of the rehearsal dinner, Harper drove past the Whitaker property. Strings of lights glowed across the yard. Laughter carried through the warm September air. And for a moment, it looked like any other small-town gathering. But beneath it, she felt the pull of something darker. At the edge of the property, Harper spotted something strange. A man standing just inside the tree line, still and silent, watching the house. She pulled the cruiser over, but by the time she reached the spot, the figure was gone. No footprints, no sound, only the rustle of leaves. The following morning, Harper gathered Shaw, Harlan, and Tom in the office. "We can't treat this like a regular police detail. If the manuscripts are right, this is orchestrated. Which means the danger isn't just in the woods, it's inside the town. We have to assume someone close is involved." Tom exhaled sharply. So, anyone could be a suspect. Even someone at the wedding. Shaw slid another manuscript across the table. "There's more. The next victim isn't just taken. They're placed at a new node in the system. The circle isn't just symbolic, it's physical. Each clearing, each chamber is part of a geometric network. And it's incomplete." Harper frowned. "Incomplete?" "Yes," Shaw said. "Michael and Lila filled one node in 1985. This year's victim will complete the next. The circle isn't closed until all the nodes are filled. And once it's closed—" She hesitated, her face pale. "Once it's closed, whatever they've been feeding, maintaining, it will be whole." The thought pressed like a stone against Harper's chest. The circle wasn't just about disappearances. It was building toward something. That evening, Harper drove back out to the Whitaker property. The rehearsal was in full swing, music spilling out into the cool night air. Families laughed, children chased each other through the grass, and the soon-to-be married couple glowed with nervous excitement. But Harper's eyes weren't on them. They were on the tree line, the dark wall of forest just beyond the lights. She thought of the manuscripts, of the skeletal remains below the earth, of Michael and Lila smiling in their wedding photos just before being swallowed by the system. The next cycle was coming, and Cedar Hollow was about to bleed again. The Whitaker wedding day dawned bright and clear, the kind of golden autumn morning that small towns treasured. By noon, the old mill was alive with laughter, the air rich with the smells of roasted meat, cider, and fresh bread. Guests arrived in their Sunday best, arms linked, children skipping between them. To anyone looking on, it was a perfect celebration. But Harper couldn't shake the knot in her stomach. Every light strung across the property, every smiling face, every toast raised. It all felt like theater. A stage carefully set, while the true script waited in the shadows of Cedar Hollow's trees. She and Deputy Harlan moved discreetly through the crowd, their eyes scanning faces, watching the edges of the forest. Tom Keller stayed near the entrance with two deputies, while Dr. Shaw lingered by the mill house, her eyes sharp, as though she expected the walls themselves to breathe. As the ceremony began, Harper stood at the back, her hand resting near her sidearm. The bride walked down the aisle beneath an arch of autumn leaves, her white dress catching the sunlight. Guests turned, smiling, dabbing at their eyes. It was a moment of joy, but Harper's gaze was drawn, beyond the arch, into the line of trees swaying in the breeze. For a second, she swore she saw figures there. Not one, but several. Watching. The vows were spoken, rings exchanged, applause erupted. Harper forced herself to clap along, though her heart raced. The manuscripts echoed in her head, of bond, of blood, of vow. As the reception unfolded, Harper caught Dr. Shaw's eye. Shaw gestured subtly, then slipped away toward the edge of the property. Harper followed, weaving through the laughter and music, until they were alone by the tree line. "There," Shaw whispered, pointing. Carved into the bark of an oak, half hidden by moss, was a fresh symbol, identical to the ones in the manuscripts, angular and looping, a sigil that marked the clearings. It hadn't been there before. "They're preparing," Shaw said. "The ritual isn't about the ceremony inside the mill. It's about what comes after. They'll try to take the couple before the night is out." A scream cut through the music. Harper spun, her heart lurching. Near the edge of the dance floor, one of the bridesmaids had collapsed, clutching her throat. Guests rushed to her side, shouting for help, as panic rippled across the crowd. In the chaos, Harper realized what was happening. It was a distraction. "Where are the bride and groom?" she barked, shoving through the crowd. But they were gone. Harper sprinted toward the mill house, Deputy Harlan on her heels. The bride's bouquet lay discarded by the door, petals crushed into the dirt. Inside, the rooms were empty, silent, except for the faint rustle of wind through the rafters. "Sheriff!" Harlan called, his voice tight with fear. He pointed toward the back door, where muddy footprints led into the trees. Two sets, side by side, as if the couple had been led or dragged into the forest. Harper's blood ran cold. The cycle was moving. With a surge of adrenaline, Harper, Shaw, and Harlan plunged into the woods, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. The footprints led them deeper, twisting between oaks and pines, toward the same clearings mapped in the manuscripts. Branches snapped ahead. Voices echoed, low, chanting, growing louder with each step. Harper slowed, raising her hand. They crouched low, creeping forward until the trees thinned, and the forest opened into a clearing. There, beneath the moonlight, stood a circle of hooded figures. At the center were the bride and groom, kneeling, their hands bound, eyes wide with terror. The hooded figures swayed, their voices weaving into a chilling cadence. The symbols carved into the ground around the couple glowed faintly, as if pulsing with life. Harper's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The orchestrators of the cycle, the keepers of the circle. She gripped her weapon tighter, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stop it here. No more." But deep down, she knew. The circle wasn't going to let go without a fight. The clearing pulsed with a strange rhythm, the hooded figures chanting as if their voices were stitched into the soil itself. The bride and groom knelt in the center, trembling, their faces pale in the moonlight. Harper's hand tightened on her gun, her every nerve screaming that this was no ordinary confrontation. It wasn't just people in robes. It was something older, something that had survived through secrecy and blood. Dr. Shaw whispered beside her. "The manuscripts said once the circle closes, it will awaken fully. If they finish this ritual, it won't stop with them. It will keep feeding until the whole town belongs to it." Harper's jaw clenched. "Then we don't let it finish." She broke from the tree line, gun raised. "Cedar Hollow Sheriff's Office! Step away from them! Now!" The chanting faltered, and for a moment the clearing fell silent. Then one of the hooded figures turned. Harper's breath caught. It was Mayor Caldwell. His face was calm, almost serene, as though her presence had been expected all along. "You shouldn't be here, Sheriff," he said softly, his voice carrying in the night air. "This is older than you. Older than law. The circle has always been kept. Without it, Cedar Hollow dies." "People are dead," Harper snapped, her gun steady. "Michael and Lila. Dozens before them. You call that protection?" Caldwell's eyes gleamed. "Sacrifice. Necessary to keep the balance. They gave themselves so the rest could live in peace." The other figures shifted, murmuring agreement. Their voices were eerie, calm, as though none of this was monstrous, as though murder and ritual were kindness. Behind her, Harlan raised his rifle, his voice shaking. "Sheriff, say the word." But before Harper could, the ground trembled. The symbols carved into the soil flared brighter, the lines glowing as though fire ran beneath the earth. The bride screamed, the groom struggled against his bonds, and the chanting surged again, louder, desperate, as though the circle itself demanded to be finished. Harper fired into the air. Enough! The shot shattered the chant, echoing through the trees. She charged forward, kicking one of the symbols, scattering dirt over the glowing lines. The light flickered, weakened. No! Caldwell bellowed. He lunged toward her, his hood falling back, face twisted in fury. You'll break it! You'll doom us all! They grappled in the dirt, his strength surprising for a man his age. Harper fought back with everything she had, her hand closing around the metal box she'd carried from the underground chamber. With a burst of adrenaline, she slammed it down on the symbols etched in the ground. The manuscripts inside spilled out, fluttering across the circle. And as the pages touched the glowing lines, the light faltered, then died. The chanting collapsed into chaos. Hooded figures scattered, some fleeing into the trees, others clawing desperately at the soil, as though trying to rekindle the circle's power. Caldwell howled, his voice breaking, before Harlan dragged him back and pinned him to the ground. The clearing grew silent. The bride sobbed as Harper cut her free, pulling her into her arms. The groom clung to Harlan, both shaking. Dr. Shaw bent to pick up one of the fallen manuscripts, her face pale. It's broken. For now, the circle's undone. She met Harper's eyes. But it's not destroyed. It can be rebuilt. Unless we burn every record, tear down every node, it will wait. And it will try again. Harper looked at the pages scattered across the dirt. Centuries of secrets, of blood, of silence. Michael and Lila's names weren't just lost in them. They were bound to them. Victims swallowed by a town too afraid to face the truth. But tonight, the cycle had been broken. As dawn broke over Cedar Hollow, Harper stood at the edge of the forest, watching the first rays of light pierce through the branches. The bride and groom were safe, the hooded figures arrested, the manuscripts locked away as evidence. Yet deep in her chest, Harper knew the truth. The circle wasn't gone. It was waiting. And someday, if Cedar Hollow let itself forget again, it would rise.